Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of Watch Out. I'm your host, Drew Pizzulo. I have my good sidekick here with me on this episode, Nishan. He has been in other episodes of It's About Time, but now he's the first one he's joining us for Watch Out. Tonight's episode, I have been teasing it the last couple months, was on how the body can stop battery watches. Um, there's been quite a few cases of this. I've had this happen to me a couple times, and now my wife has had this happen to her several times, where the body's energy can stop a battery, a quartz movement. I brought Nishan because he was a jeweler in on this episode, where he can actually explain how that can happen and what the main reason is for it. Because some people don't believe it, but it actually is a true phenomenon.
Yeah.
So what do you know about this phenomenon from being a jeweler all those years?
Well, there's a little bit of science to this, right? Because at the end of the day, the human body has electrical currents going through it. It's how the brain is sending signals to our muscles so that we know to open our hands or close our hands or move our arms. And for some people, their bodies just have stronger signals than others. And so what ends up happening is, especially because watches are full of metal components, batteries, capacitors that help regulate the electricity running through them, it can interfere, cause interference with it. It can cause batteries to die sooner. It can cause shorts to happen. It can cause them to run really wacky. If they don't short out, it really depends on the make and model. But it is a real thing, and I did have customers for a time who would come in and they would say, I can't get a battery to last more than 6 to 12 months. And it was purely just because their bodies were shorting the batteries out, shorting the capacitors out.
And well, and I've had this happen to me too. And one of the things that they tell you, if a jeweler will tell you, and it has worked. One of the things that they suggest as a solution to a battery watch, if your body is stopping it, is the fact that the moisture from your body, especially if you sweat a lot, can get inside underneath the case back and short out the movement. So the first thing they tell you to do is, okay, hey, listen, you're going to have to go and get new seals for the watch. We want to reseal it. We want to put, the other thing was that they told me was, do you want to put a silver, I guess a silver lithium battery as opposed to a nickel lithium battery, which I guess has more durability to it not shorting out.
Yeah,
What
well,
is the truth on? Is there any difference between silver versus a nickel battery?
well, there is, right? So silver, like copper, like gold, are very good conductors of electricity and conductors of heat. And the way they work as metals is, in order for them to really heat up and create a problem, the amount of heat running through them has to be constant and to a point where it has an even distribution throughout the entire metal before it starts warming up. So if you have a battery that has the silver in it, it's not going to short out as easily because it's not going to allow itself to be as, call it, motivated or affected by those electrical impulses.
So in aspect, it actually protects the movement better than a nickel battery would.
Well, it would, yeah, because the nickel is not going to do that. It's not going to help dissipate whatever electricity is coming through it from your body, of course. We're not talking about major electric shocks, of course. But yeah, it will do that and it will help protect the movement because at the end of the day, the movement, just like wiring in a house, it's a one-way path. It's creating the circuit to allow the electricity to flow through the watch for everything to work. So if there's a problem with the battery, and the battery isn't the weakest point in the watch, depending on the age or depending on if there happens to be moisture in there, or if your seal is broken and the pressure is off inside, it can cause the capacitor to go out. It can just cause any other component in there to break because there's a lot of metal in there. Not all movements are plastic based with the battery in it.
And you'll find also that people who do acupuncture have this problem as well, because the acupuncture is the changing of energy and the way the energy flows in the body. So if your energy is flowing on the outside and all of a sudden acupuncture, whatever the acupuncturist does, now it's going through the middle of your hand, right over where the watch sits on your wrist, it can burn out or stop the movement, correct?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
that would be something that, especially if you're doing any type of energy exercises, but the most common exercise you could probably do is acupuncture that would start happening. Because when my wife did this, she stopped 3 battery watches in 1 week. all different brands, all different makes, all different models, and the only solution that you would have if you didn't want to go and get it resealed and try to keep out the moisture or try to buffer that electric shock would be to go to an automatic watch. And even that isn't foolproof because what we were just discussing before the episode started was the hairsprings due to the magnetic pulse can literally clamp together and speed it up, correct?
Right.
I
Because
mean,
they're affected by the electromagnetism, basically, because you were talking about like microengineering here. So it doesn't take as much force or as much influence to affect those parts. But you're not usually getting electricity running through those because, well, let's face it, it's mechanical, it's automatic. So it's generating a mechanical energy, not an electric energy, which is what's causing it to run. So when you introduce the electricity into it, now all of a sudden you're creating static electricity and it's going to run faster.
would there be any difference if you used a hand wind movement as opposed to an automatic movement? Because I know they're very different creatures as well.
Yeah, I mean, the difference would really just be you won't be as affected by it, right? Because the hand wind movement is going to slow down by nature of the fact that it's not self-winding in that same way like the true automatic
Does it
is.
still have those hair springs that can clip together, or no? Is it designed differently where you wouldn't run into that problem?
No, I think it still does.
So you could still have the speeding up of the movement, though it's not going to stop
Yeah.
like a quartz movement would, where it would short out. It would speed up. So even that was a good question that I wanted to ask him because I knew automatic watches were susceptible to that. I didn't know if hand winds, because they're a simpler mechanical movement, if they had the hair springs as well that would clamp together and speed up the
I
movement.
mean, if memory serves, I believe they do. And at the end of the day, the major difference between them is that one can keep itself going, where the other one needs an outside force to wind it. And so the difference is you might get that initial jolt, but as you lose the tension in there, and the spring is helping hold that tension, it's not going to be as effective because it'll slow down, and then with the extra jolt, let's say, from your body energy, maybe it'll be normal, but then it'll slow down more, and even with the jolt, you'll still be behind. So you may not feel it the same way. You might feel like, oh, my watch is running fine, but it's actually running slow.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I remember I was on a cruise several years ago, and the watch would stop only when we were in going to dinner at the bottom level, and that's because you're theoretically closest to the equator when you're on water, and the magnetic energy can stop the watch there if it's a quartz watch. Now, when I had an automatic watch on, I never had a problem. But only when I was wearing expensive movements, and the Concorde Mariners have very, very Swiss, they have expensive movements that last 30, 40 years. Those suckers were stopping on a dime. But when I brought them back upstairs to the room, I'd start them up, and all of a sudden they'd work.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing the magnetic pulse of the Earth, the closer you get to the core, is going to affect the watch as well.
Yeah.
Because you would have that phenomenon on a cruise, because when you're out in open water, you go down, the further down you go, the closer you are, the more susceptible you are to that happening.
Well, and when you're on water, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I've done some reading, and usually when you're on water, the properties.
Hence the water we're in right now.
Hence the water we're in now. The properties of things change. You can move things with less force. You feel lighter. Electricity passes through it with more ease because water is a really great conductor of electricity. So when you're literally in the water, because you're below deck, as it were, right?
Correct.
You're going to have those influences coming through. It's going to create, call it interference, if you will. And that's going to affect the watch's ability, which is why it's going to stop running.
Correct. So the long running answer of can your body's energy stop a watch? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's
Absolutely.
absolutely. And there's several reasons why, and we discussed some of those tonight. So hopefully this is an eye-opener for everybody, the fact that, yeah, there's certain ways that you can solve the problem. One is getting seals and sealing up your watch, and try doing it that way. Sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't, depending on how strong your body's energy is. And because you want to eliminate all moisture inside of a movement to short it out. And number two, get an automatic or a wind-up watch. That will solve the problem of it stopping, but it may not necessarily solve the problem of it to speed up, because things still may clamp together due to the energy that Nishan was talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll leave you with some jewelry related tips, which can affect you with a watch. Um, these are things that people experience all the time. Something that's more common is copper, right? When you wear copper, some people's fingers turn green because they have sensitivity to copper on their body, and the way the salinity of their sweat interacts with the copper causes it to create a reaction, and now their finger turns green. And they could get some irritation and they won't be able to wear it, and that's where you have people that have an allergy to costume jewelry, right? But not everybody has that allergy. Then you also have people like myself where if you rhodium a ring, a white gold ring, a yellow gold ring, put this rhodium on it to give it a nice white coating, change the color, my body eats it up in a week. And I have customers, or had customers, where they would come in every few months because their body would just eat through the rhodium, and you would see the tint of the yellow gold or the white gold coming through again. So the human body is really an amazing thing, and I think it's something to be considered that people's bodies are different, and while the majority of people may not suffer from these problems, it is a real thing that afflicts people, and these little annoyances, if you will, that do crop up.
So I guess the summary is listen to your body. Don't try to fight your body's impulses or your body's chemical makeup, because you're going to cost yourself a shitload of money. That would be my solution to all of this. And take the solutions as they come, but there are solutions to this phenomenon. So can your body stop a watch? Yes, it can. So again, thanks for joining us tonight. I'll see you on next month's episode of Watch Out.